Farm Digest is made possible in part by a grant from the Central Educational Network.
Farm Digest with Chet Randolph. Produced Friday, May 6th.
Hello, I'm Chet Randolph. This is Farm Digest. Welcome back. Did you ever wonder why, when President Carter planned to have a meatless meal on Food Day, beef industry and pork industry leaders were quick to complain? Well, in our last edition, we heard from the cattlemen and found out why, and in this one, we'll hear from the pork industry and try to do the same. Pork provides 1/3 of the nation's red meat and supplies nearly $8 billion to the farm economy every year. It's a strong commodity. But as with many other agricultural entities these days, the pork industry is facing problems that go beyond the normal fluctuations that are usually expected in agriculture, and at the top of the list is pseudorabies. Later on in the program, we'll have a special report on the disease, and we'll look at what it's cost American pork producers. We'll also talk with our special guests about a few other problems that are facing the pork industry, problems like what to do about something called turkey hams, and what to do about recent governmental proposals to limit the use of chemical additives in America's feedlots. Our guests will be J. Marvin Garner, who is Executive Director of the National Pork Producers Council, and Julia Hughley, who is with the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. But before we meet them, let's talk for a moment about current commodity market activity with our regular market analyst, Bob Anderson, who's with the Farmers Grain and Livestock Company in Des Moines, and Dr. Marvin Skadberg, who is an agricultural economist from Iowa State University in Ames. Bob, is the bull market in beans over?
If it's not over, why, it's certainly wounded very heavily. You know, since we're talking about pork, and last week we talked about the bears, the bulls, and the hogs, it reestablishes that principle of scale-up marketing, not trying to pick tots. These high prices slip away overnight, and in my opinion, the market is severely damaged now.
You think it might rally some, but maybe not go through the highs?
No, I don't think we'll see new highs unless we have weather problems.
Okay, fine. Now, before we go any farther, let's recap what happened to commodity prices during the past week. Beans zoomed up more than $1 in 3 days, hitting $10.25 Tuesday. Then they got clobbered with 3 limit down days, taking prices back down 90 cents. Lack of export buying, concern over the outcome of the delayed hunt trial, a fear Brazil might be making sales, and weak meal prices were major factors. With a lot of corn planted early and widespread rain, prices dropped a nickel under the lows at harvest time last November. Then, in spite of beans going down 60 cents, corn went up 2 cents. All the bearish news was in the market. There was concern about the cold weather forecast, and the thought if we got more rain, it might delay corn planting, causing those who had sold to take profits. Monday, cattle hit their highest price in 8 months, but with good-sized runs, poor packer margins, and lack of retail buying, they closed the week $1.50 lower. June hogs started the week from a low of $44, a fired-up belly or bacon market that hit new highs, good pork demand in total, a seasonal uptrend, and the possibility that hogs were lost because of the cold weather and disease earlier took hogs to new contract highs. The full move was almost $3 during the week before dropping 80 cents near the close. Bob, we have these futures $7, $8 over cash. Do you think the futures have made most of their run?
I think so. The futures market is pointing the way. The cash is lagging behind. We've got good runs in the cash market. The futures are anticipating higher prices. I think we're nearing a very toppy action in the futures, so the cash has got to catch up with it.
And then for the man who has hogs to sell, you would say that the outlook for cash is favorable.
Yes, I think so. People that have hogs to sell, this has been an excellent time in the last week to go ahead and move it out, take that day off of field work. We could have some overruns Monday because of the rain, but all in all, it's been a good period.
Marvin, do you think we've got $2, $3, $4 up on these cash hogs?
I guess it depends upon the length of time. If you look at past data, if you look, say, toward say sometime in July, it averages about $5 to $6 from now till July. And certainly, as Bob said, we'll have some up and downs in there, but the general movement ought to be upward.
Yeah. Bob, let me ask you, are we seeing some pretty good featuring on this pork?
Unbelievable. The features
I
all
should say in retail stores, I'm saying.
all over the East Coast, the West Coast, major cities, Detroit, Chicago, and so on are having massive features this weekend on pork. The industry, the retail stores have backed away from the beef. It's come up. It hit 70 cents on the East Coast, dressed beef, and I don't know of a single chain that's featuring beef. The pork is red hot right now.
Marvin, on the pork industry, are we going to see a pretty good buildup of hog numbers coming on in October, December period?
We think so. We think that even this spring one might have been underestimated. When you look at the hog profits, it seems to me that, and the returns to other farm enterprises, it just doesn't seem to me that should indicate any decrease in numbers and probably a greater increase.
Bob, do you become a little alarmed at what might happen with all these increases?
Jet, remember one time I talked about a graph that shows profitability that Marv talked about, where profitability dips down into a negative level and comes back up in the cycle into a positive level, people making good profits, and all the gilts and bores are being in use, and I think we're going to see severe excess numbers.
Okay, now you've alerted the producer. How about the consumer that's buying pork? You're saying that you can look for a little higher prices at the retail counter.
I think so, but I'm concerned about the fact that a lot of pork is going into boxes, and it may blunt this drive to the top this summer that Marv's talking about.
All right, fine. Continuing on the consumer vein there, you know, Americans have witnessed the development of a whole new line of alternative and substitute food products here in the last decade, many of which are designed to compete for a portion of limited consumer dollars. And currently, that competition is more evident in the battle between the pork industry and the turkey industry over something with the unlikely name of turkey ham. Sarah Frasher looked into it all and has this report.
Turkey ham is an aggregated piece of meat, molded and formed from the thighs of turkeys and processed to taste like pork. The basic complaint of the pork producers is that the term turkey ham is deceptive, leading the consumer to believe that the product does indeed contain pork. Pork producers feel the turkey industry is cashing in on their identity, and in doing so, hurting the pork ham reputation. Spokesmen for the turkey industry assert that they are not deceiving the public, and according to their studies, turkey ham costs less, is higher in protein, and lower in fat than most pork hams. The National Pork Producers Council says nutrition and price are not the issue anyway. What is the issue is labeling, and they believe the label ham should only apply to pork. What it all boils down to is a classic battle over product identification between two industries fighting for consumer loyalty and the consumer dollar. On April 15th, the American Meat Institute and the National Pork Producers Council filed a petition with the USDA requesting that federal regulations restrict the use of the term ham to the labeling of meat products made from the hind legs of swine and preclude the use of the term ham in connection with the labeling of poultry products. Whether the department accepts or denies that petition, administrative action will not necessarily end the controversy. Spokesmen for both sides say that if the USDA decision goes against them, litigation is still a possibility. And after all of this, who knows? There is still turkey bologna, turkey hot dogs, turkey pastrami, salami, and sausage. And the pork producers aren't very happy about those products either. I'm Sarah Frasher.
Marv, what do you think the impact of turkey hams has had on the price to pork producers?
I would say very slight. When you look at the volume movement of that product related to the total pork product, it has relatively little effect. This doesn't say that it isn't an issue that shouldn't be looked at, but relatively small effect.
Bob?
Well, I don't think there's much effect to it. One of the questions that I'd have to ask is, what about when they talk about a ham steak, you know? So I don't think it's going to have much effect.
Okay, thank you, Bob. As we've just seen, it's difficult to assign a dollar value to what's at stake with turkey hams, but when it comes to pseudorabies, that's not the case. It's been estimated, for example, that nearly $18 million were lost to pseudorabies between December and February, a loss that will eventually affect pork processors and consumers, in addition to the devastation that it caused pork producers. And although those kinds of losses are continuing, some people say that things might be getting better. Dan Miller has this report.
Technically, it goes by the name of Ojewski's disease, but most farmers and most people who are familiar with it call it pseudorabies because of the high fever and convulsions which affect the central nervous system of hogs. In a way, it's been like a bad dream come true. Pseudorabies has always been around, it just hasn't been around as much. In 1974, for example, there were 125 cases of it reported in the United States. Thus far in 1977, there have been at least 500, a jump which could mean the loss of 250,000 hogs by the end of this year and $200 million by the end of next. The pseudorabies outbreak has been most severe in Iowa. Before 1973, pseudorabies cases averaged about 5 per year. But since that time, it has spread across Iowa's northern counties like an unfortunate reference, the plague, to a point where 333 cases have been identified and quarantined since the first of this year. What you're about to see is a story about what a few people tried to do about pseudorabies in 1974, and about what a host of people are trying to do now. Much of it isn't very pretty, but then neither is the disease. Blood tests have become a pretty well-established practice on the Hubbard, Iowa farm of Tom Ingebrigtsen. Pretty well established, that is, since 1974, when he lost nearly 600 hogs and $65,000 to one of the first reported cases of pseudorabies in Iowa. Neither he nor his veterinarian, Arlen Zerke, are forced to go through this difficult and time-consuming process every time there are hogs to sell. They do it, though, because they care, because they've spent the last 4 years trying to simultaneously rebound from their experiences with pseudorabies and trying to convince other people of its seriousness. They do it also because, as Tom Ingebrigtsen says, there's just no money in dead pigs.
Dr. Zerke and I literally begged the government staff in Des Moines back in '74 to be tough on it then, when it was just in a small area and we thought we could handle it and control it. It's so far out of control now that I think it's going to be a very tough row to hoe now to get it brought under control and really ever eradicate it.
It's a disease that certainly has not made us any money and hasn't made any of our clients any money. And so we'd like nothing better than to have it to come to an end, but that's a ways down the road.
So, too, is the twice-weekly trip that Dr. Arlen Zerke makes with the serum from Tom Ingebrigtsen's hogs, down the road to the Diagnostic Center at the Iowa State University Veterinary Complex in Ames. The vet complex has, along with Purdue University, done some of the most extensive testing of pseudorabies in the Midwest. Nearly 100 tissue tests a week, for example, from hogs that have already died, or ones that are waiting to be slaughtered. And roughly 1,500 blood serum tests, like the ones that lab technician Linda Beifelt are working on now. This kind of day-to-day exposure has made Dr. Howard Hill, who supervises the testing, somewhat of an expert.
Economically, I think pseudorabies could very easily equal the seriousness of hog cholera. One of the reasons I say that is because there's a little more to an outbreak of pseudorabies than might first meet the eye. For example, in a typical acute outbreak, you have fairly heavy death losses in young pigs, pigs that are still nursing the sow. But you also have some rather severe losses, economic losses, in the adult animal, particularly the pregnant animal.
The financial losses that Dr. Hill just mentioned have averaged out to just around $29,000 for every farmer whose herds have been affected by the disease. And whenever tissue or serum that is evaluated here shows positive signs of the virus, the losses get even greater. What to do about it all poses formidable questions in the minds of the people who have been working daily with the virus, whether to vaccinate or eradicate.
I would personally like to see the program, the vaccination program, be coupled with a control program. And this would primarily involve a large testing operation of herds in hopes that we don't move infected animals and move them into susceptible herds. Or, for example, move infected animals into exhibition with negative animals, things like this. If we can control that, I think we can help control the spread of the disease.
Evidently, some people in government are beginning to agree. The Iowa General Assembly, for example, recently approved legislation to permit the State Department of Agriculture and its chief veterinarian, Dr. E.A. Butler, to use their existing resources and staffs to establish a pseudorabies program for the state.
I would visualize that we would have restricted movements. We would possibly consider different type of quarantines. We'll very likely have control of vaccines. We'll have controls of movements through markets, perhaps, and perhaps establishment of a qualified herd that we would consider would be free of pseudorabies.
Butler also said that he might require tests of any breeding stock that is sold in Iowa, and possibly might test all slaughter boars and sows, so government officials could make it more difficult for hog producers to let cases of pseudorabies go unreported. None of that, though, can happen until a program actually gets going, and that may take some time. Until that occurs, farmers like Tom Ingebrigtsen will continue to be cautious, will continue to rebuild their devastated herds, and will continue to hope.
It's going to get back to normal. By the end of this summer, I'll have my sow herd back to 120 sows like it was. And hopefully, if we don't get it again, and that's why we're testing now to make sure we don't have it, everything will get back to normal again.
Okay.
That's what I'm hoping.
Leave one of those full pails here.
Next Wednesday, the USDA is scheduled to outline its national program for the control of pseudorabies. And from what we've been able to learn, the plan will be very similar to the hog cholera program of a few years ago. It will contain 3 stages, including preparation, control and vaccination, and eradication and indemnity. Some pork producers feel that this plan would be a step in the right direction, but as we've mentioned earlier, pseudorabies isn't the only thing that they've got to think about. One of the chief spokesmen is Marvin Garner, who is Executive Secretary of the National Pork Producers Council in Des Moines, a person who wants extensive federal funding for overall swine industry research, and who isn't all that happy about proposed Food and Drug Administration restrictions on the amounts of antibiotics that can be used in America's feedlots. Dr. Marvin Skadberg has stayed with us to share some thoughts about the economic effects of the proposed restrictions, and Julia Hughley is with the agency that's proposing to do the restricting, the Federal Food and Drug Administration. Let me ask you, Marvin, how important are antibiotics in hog feed?
Chet, the last 25 years has given us a very in-depth use of these products, and I think through this period of time we've proven that they are necessary to control the disease level, to improve the health level.
But are they important in the feed every day, or can they be used as a treatment for specific outbreaks?
That's been difficult to evaluate in the respect that any time that they have been taken out, there has been a less efficient production of pork created in that particular situation. And we're quite concerned that this action has been taken singly on theory, where we, in requesting research, have to come up with proof that we need it even.
Julia Hughley, first, what does the FDA propose to do?
Well, the Food and Drug Administration has proposed to ban the antibiotics used in animal feed if they are antibiotics that are also used as human drugs to treat human diseases.
For example?
Well, penicillin and tetracycline drugs. Now, I understand that these are used to prevent disease. We're talking about 3 different levels. We're talking about preventing disease in animals. We're talking about treating diseases. But then we're talking about growth promotants. And from what I understand, there are other choices that can be made that don't have this link with human health.
Okay, well, let's...
And so we're concerned about the human health link.
Let's examine that in a minute, but I want to go on and ask you now why you feel that it's important to ban these antibiotics.
Well, if using antibiotics to treat bacteria in animals, and that same bacteria is present in humans and can cause disease, then if those bacteria become resistant to these drugs, this means then we won't have drugs to treat the human conditions. the human, the human diseases. So we're concerned not only with the safety of the food supply in the use of these drugs, but also in the, the human health issues in treating diseases in humans with these same medications.
Marvin Skadberg, just how much impact will this have for the pork producer?
Well, I think that when you really look at it, the consumer's going to pay the cost of this. What it's going to do is raise the cost of pork production. You're going to produce probably less pork, but at a higher price. And so I think the consumers have to realize, and it's a balancing of, where do they want it? It's going to come out of their pocket. It will not eventually come out. It may be a smaller pork industry, but it won't come out of the pork industry because they will not produce unless they have a profit, and there's going to be greater risk in the pork producing business.
Are these other drugs not as effective? Is there that much difference?
That would be not a question that I can answer. I'm saying if there is not this medical protection.
There are no drugs to present time to replace the tetracycline group. The tetracycline covers a larger spectrum of infective levels than does any other individual product. There is nothing to replace it. There are a few individual drugs that will control a segment of that spectrum of infections, but none that will cover all of them. And most of those that will cover a portion are 2 to 9 times as expensive to use as is the tetracycline.
All right, then what about another option? How about better management and control on the farm? I think there are other options besides becoming dependent on drugs.
This is one of the uses, but when we have been forced through the lessening of labor supply on the farms to force these animals into more restricted areas, keep them in confinement, and to increase our production where we have a pig mature to market weight in 5.5 to 6.5 months rather than 10 months to 11 like we were some 30 years ago before the advent of the antibiotics. This has forced us, by virtue of putting animals closer together, we have had a higher increase in the disease level. These are low-level diseases and infective levels, and in all this period of 25 years of use, there is not one individual case where any resistant bacteria or viral agent in the human has ever been found to be crossed over from the animal.
I would add
on what basis, you said. Mrs. Euclid?
I was going to say there have been studies, though, to show that these bacteria can, build up a resistance. And I think we've got to weigh the benefits of using these drugs against the risks of using them to human health.
But at no time have they ever been resistant to the point they couldn't be treated by a therapeutic amount.
But there are other choices that can be used without that risk.
No, there's not.
How did you evaluate the risk to the producer from disease versus the risk to the human?
Well, now here again, let's get back and talk about the different levels. If it's to treat a disease, that's still permissible. But to use merely as a growth promotant, that's a different use. And this is the reason I'm saying to treat disease, I think that's a logical purpose. But as a growth promotant, perhaps, we ought to look at other options that are open. I can sympathize with the producer, but, I'm a consumer. When I go to that retail shelf and choose that product, I'm concerned about my health when I choose these things. And I think you have to look at it from the consumer's point of view.
Every pork producer is a consumer, too, and he probably eats more of his own produce than does most consumers. So they're not in any way going to damage the health of their own families. So I don't think this is a very strong argument.
But again, I think we come back to the point that consumers ultimately going to have to pay for this.
Well,
if it's through better management,
product, I think it would be worth the cost.
Well, that's that's the consumer to make this kind of judgment.
Now, one of the
certainly an individual producer needs some protection. I mean, there's some losses there, but if you look at the total pork industry, it's consumers going to pay a higher price for the product.
I think we're aware too that sometimes some of these farmers are under such pressure that maybe some of the things might get a little careless or abusive too. Now, how are you going to handle these problems? In other words, it's a dead pig. There's no profit in a dead pig.
Well,
you've got to control.
I don't want to get into that argument. You guys can argue that. But my argument is that it is going to be a higher cost of pork. There's no question about it.
A couple of other areas, but just quickly before we leave, what about the Delaney Amendment, which can measure to to the billionth here now?
Okay.
What's the FDA doing about the possibility of changing that?
All right, there are a couple of issues involved there. Number one, the Delaney Amendment was passed by Congress, and Congress makes the laws.
Yes.
FDA has a responsibility for enforcing those laws, so we're looking at a legal issue. The second issue is the Delaney Amendment was written back in 1958 when we had the scientific methodology only to measure parts per million. Today, our equipment is so exquisite that we can measure parts per trillion. So the second question then is, what do we do with this sort of exquisite scientific information? Is it time to set levels or limits on our scientific methodology? And this is being discussed at this point in time, both the legal and the scientific issues.
And I presume you're working to change the
Yes,
aim.
Chet, this is one of the problems. Our methodology has outstripped our laws and has gone far beyond any intent of the original law. And we have in our own natural habitat certain ingredients that appear in our food items and in our natural way of life that are illegal as far as the Delaney law is concerned, yet no illegality has been intended, nor no management practice has been brought about that creates that.
Okay, let's move on a little bit here. How about pseudorabies? What does the Pork Producers Council recommend? Do you favor this possibility of prohibiting interstate movement of pigs under conditions?
I think we've got a very critical situation here in that there's so much emotion when it hits an individual herd. One of the problems is that it has not affected a high enough number of farms yet to where there are enough people involved in it. I had calls this morning from a man that 30 days ago didn't even come to the pseudorabies meeting up here at Ames, and yet he has spent, I would imagine, $200 on phone calls in the last 2 days because his seed stock herd is now has pseudorabies. So this is one of our problems.
You don't see any end in sight then? You see it as a growing epidemic?
No, I think we do have. I think the government is coming out with a program this next week that we'll, it's one spaced much along the outline and recommendation of the resolutions passed by our National Pork Producers Council, and I think it has some initial steps that will help bring it into control. Now, to talk about eradication today, I agree with the fellows on the earlier on the show. I think we're at a position now with the incidence high enough and with little enough knowledge that we can't eradicate it right now. I think we need to learn to control it, and then we eradicate it.
Now we'll talk health in still another area, and that is the pork industry has had some problems with public image, such as nitrites and some others. Where do you think you stand now with the consumer? Have you got some basic research that is refuting some of the things that have been said?
I think this has been refuted to some extent. Also, the processing industry has found that by using of ascorbic acid and some other products like this, they can reduce the amount of these nitrates or nitrite producing products to a point that is acceptable to a much greater extent. And I think here again we're going to have to weigh the problem with botulism and some other problems like this with how much of this is carcinogenic.
Okay, just before we close, how did you react when you heard that the president was going to have a meatless day on Food Day?
I thought he and his wife should be allowed that privilege, for that matter, because when I saw in Time or Newsweek magazine that they were going to have, that they thought of one of their most comfortable family dinners was pork chops and potatoes, and when Billy Carter comes out talking about ham hock and beans and other things like this all the time, I can't fight with him one day eating all vegetables.
Okay, fine. Thank you, Marvin and Julia and Marvin. Appreciate it very much. That's it for Farm Digest for this week. Now, on our next edition, we'll be taking a look at farmer cooperatives. We'll find out what they're doing, become more competitive with the big grain companies, and what that means to the American farmer. I'm Chet Randolph. Have a good weekend.